All right, three big unions, three big strikes, and the response of government and industry. Super important to understand here. It's a trend that's been going on for a while, increasing in intensity and going to last for a while. The two don't get along very well at all. One of the most important big unions here in the post-Civil War time period is the National Labor Union. Now, labor unions have been around before the Civil War for quite a while, but they're rising in importance and in size as the population gets bigger and as in the conditions of the Industrial Revolution and living in wages and boom and bust cycles of depression get worse. This is one of the first national unions to attempt to unify people of various backgrounds on a national scale. Usually they were small. As we've talked about before, they're small in their trades, but this one is one in which they're trying to bring together trade unions or skilled workers, unskilled workers, and farmers. William Silvis was the founder. He promoted the idea that there should be no distinction between nationality or race, to try to include that into the actual bylaws of the union and to try to get them to include women, blacks, Chinese, anybody really. The more numbers, the better. More power that way against the powers that be. But that really didn't happen. Whites didn't allow people of the other backgrounds to be brought in. One of the individuals that really tried to and was a leader for the African American community is Isaac Myers. At the particular national convention, the labor union convention, tried to get those people accepted into those unions to especially take care of the concerns and the needs of sharecroppers in the South and workers in the South who were also freedmen, African Americans. But it didn't work, so they formed the Colored National Labor Union. It does a lot of lobbying of Congress and Washington to try and apportion out and find land in the South for poor farmers, but of course that falls on deaf ears. After he is the first president, Frederick Douglass becomes the second president of the organization, and he, in his newspaper, The New Era, is the sounding board for that National Colored Convention of that was formed in 1869. But the National Labor Union is similar in some of those other reform movements like the Populists. They had cooperatives. They had stores for worker stores to have the cheapest possible available products they could find. They wanted the 8-hour workday. They were against labor strikes, though, because, being violent just wasn't socially acceptable. So they tried to go the political reform, political activity, action route. They form a political party. It falls away pretty fast. Really, and kind of falls apart fairly quickly. But they were involved in the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1883. We've got to know that. We're going to talk about it later. But they want to ban immigrants. They want to ban cheap labor coming into the country to compete with those that are already here. This economy at this point in time is fairly simplistic. You are an industrial business owner or a small shop owner, or you're making stuff with your hands. There are not many other layers to the economy like there is today. Eventually, this labor union is going to be replaced by the Knights of Labor, and it is going to be significant in terms of its membership. We'll talk about that in just a second. But it's important also to remember here that our economic panics and economic stressors of the time period are driving a lot of these calls for reform, just like William Jennings Bryan and the Populists. Strikes in the pink areas and the big explosion areas there going on, and the big, really nasty, violent ones are there as you see across the country. But the Knights of Labor here are going to try to form one big union, even bigger than the National Labor Union. And they are largely successful, but they bring in, this is very progressive, very liberal, women, African Americans, and immigrants. Again, the idea was the more, the better, the more power and strength you had to actually force change. They also included unskilled people. Terence Powderly is the leader and the founder of this, and their goal is 8-hour work days. Also, this is a common theme pretty much amongst all particular unions. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what you will, equal pay for women, and child labor. They want those children worked out. That's going to reduce the labor supply and bring up wages for adults. Children shouldn't be in there. We'll cover that a little bit more. It was extensively used at the time, and increasingly so at the time. They promoted the idea that factories should actually be owned by workers. Very kind of a socialistic kind of ideology, that their labor was part of the profit and they should share more of that profit. You're going to see a little bit of that promoted in and explained in an Edpuzzle that we'll take a look at here on the American Federation of Labor. But they also opposed strikes because it would lead to violence. Again, violence was frowned upon, and if you're violent and you're frowned upon, you're not going to be very successful as unions. So they try not to be violent. But again, when these economic panics happened, then people got really stressed out. They tended to just get violent anyway. Many had their wages cut throughout all kinds of industries during this first panic of 1873. One of those, and this panic goes on for years. It's just not 1 year. It's 5, 10 years. It takes a while to get out of these economic depressions. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, for example, cut the wages of its workers for the third time, and the workers walked out. They blocked the railroad tracks. They tried to shut down the movement of the trains to get some change, and jobs and wages restored, and eventually it led to other railroad companies and unions doing the same, and it literally led to almost the entire economy being shut down. Violence ensued to the degree in which we have trains, railroad depots, bridges being burned and destroyed. State militias were called out. Then federal troops were called out. The United States mail got shut down. The president got involved. He declares it a rebellion, and it ends there. Response of business and industry, use of violence, shut down these strikes. That's the theme you need to remember and understand. It's bad for the economy. It's threatening. It's radical. Now, one of the most significant riots, long significance, is the Haymarket Square riot that occurs in Chicago. There is a company that has exploded in size. Remember McCormick Reaper, the McCormick Harvesting Machinery Company. They're making all kinds of machinery now for farmers to grow things out in the Western Plains and out in the West. And their workers strike and demand a 8-hour workday, working too much. It's pretty common for people to work at least 60 hours a week, 6 days a week. There is no TGIF. It's Friday at this point in time. The companies respond by locking the workers out. They hire replacements or strike breakers, commonly known as scabs, by those who are going on strike. Ticks them off, makes them incredibly angry, right? When that happens, and when they replace you with cheaper labor, by the way, and cheaper labor that probably is an immigrant that has come into the country, or someone who's jobless and willing to work for less. But there are 4 workers who are killed by police during one of the protests, and to organize a protest about this particular incident, police brutality, they organize a meeting and a protest on May 4th at a particular street in Chicago. And the police order the crowd away after several individuals give these big speeches. The mayor of the city is actually there to try to make sure it doesn't get too out of control. Well, this thing is going to get very out of control. And a particular person, unidentified, I believe to this day, throws a bomb into the crowd, killing several people. 7 police officers, 1 other person is killed. Many, countless people are killed, really. Shooting ensues. It's a complete disaster. Now, the Knights of Labor was associated with this particular strike as well. And so this particular strike is going to really hurt their organization and make them look too radical. Well, by the way, it's going to make all unions look too radical, and they're going to be associated with terrorism, disorder, and unrest. In particular, because those that are rounded up and arrested connected to the violence here are members of an anarchist group. You saw the masthead of that newspaper a couple slides ago, and that A for anarchy, right? And because of this, many of these members of this organization were immigrants from Bohemia and Germany, and as a result of all this, xenophobia, fear of foreigners, lashing out against foreigners really starts to go on the increase. 7 of these anarchists are sentenced to die after being put on trial, a pretty hasty trial, really, for the death of a particular police officer during the bombing. And the executions really spark outrage from labor and workers across the planet, all over the world, heavily mostly in Europe for the most part. There are European connections, of course. This is going to trigger a particular development of a national day known as Labor Day in 1894 as a way of trying to kind of placate workers and give them a day of recognition and their importance in the economy. We have states like Oregon making it a legal holiday. this labor movement is going to become bigger, in which there are in the future by 1905, formed in California, by the way, or started in California, I believe, by Eugene V. Dems and a couple other founding members, this United Workers of the World. And they're going to try to unite all workers across the planet. This is going to be a pretty scary thing at a time when, in particular, the note there, as I mentioned there in the note, this is a time when Lenin and the socialists do try to overthrow the government of Russia in 1905. They fail. He's going to come back again, right, in 1917 and be successful eventually. But Labor Day becomes a national act in 1894, and it becomes that first Monday in September to recognize the efforts of workers and the importance of workers in the economy, right? Dedicating them to the social and economic achievements of American workers on that day and remembering that. But this particular event is really going to hurt the existence of the Knights of Labor. And the Knights of Labor are going to fall apart because of that. They're going to go on the downslide because of this particular event, the Haymarket Square riot. But in steps in, which is still around today to a particular degree, the American Federation of Labor. This might be one of the most important to know for our purposes in our exam for the year. They're going to form a union of specifically skilled and craft union, craft trade, same thing, skilled craft trade, same thing, right? Union workers. And they use strikes, but they tried not to, but they're going to grow in much larger in size, and they're eventually going to have 1.6 million plus members. Samuel Gompers is going to be the founder of this one, and their slogan was, in Latin, as you see down there in English, work conquers all. And what the idea here with this is that the AFL is really going to be kind of a governing body for and an organizer of all different types of unions. They're going to try to get all different types of unions and types of skilled trade unions together. As you can see many of them here. These are some of the ones that are associated with it today. And they're going to get them into a organization in which the AFL provides the overall strategy. They all pay dues and membership dues to the AFL. And when one particular union wants to go on strike, there is money to pay those workers while they're on strike to keep them financially afloat and try to get the changes made that they want to have changed, right? So again, it's all about numbers in this and guidance in this and bringing as many workers under one umbrella as possible. They demand higher wages, shorter work hours, better working conditions. The right to collective bargaining, again, is the most important thing here to remember. The right to actually legally choose a representative to sit across the table with the owner of a business or industry and to call for these changes to happen in those three categories we've talked about. But they're not legally given any protection. And so this is the problem here with that, and no legal right to negotiate. Strategies, they'll use something called the closed shop. We'll talk about that more in another video lesson. All workers must be members of a particular factory in order to work there, right? It's closed to members only, kind of like BJ's, right? You might note that, right? Members only, got to show your card when you walk into BJ's. They'll use walkouts. They'll just walk out of a factory as opposed to a strike and not allow for production to keep going, right? Financially hurt the factory to get them to the bargaining table. They'll use boycotts. They'll use union-made labels on the products and encourage those to be on the products that are produced, so that if it doesn't have a union-made label on it, don't buy it because that product is coming from a factory that is not supportive of workers and labor unions and treats their workers poorly. And so that's going to be a way in which people will be able to find out what to buy or not to buy when a union goes on strike. They might say, don't buy from this particular business because they are not cooperating, they're not supportive of labor. Right? One of the most significant particular strikes that you've seen here on over the weekend is the Homestead Strike in Pennsylvania. It occurs in Homestead, Pennsylvania, right outside of Pittsburgh, which is where Carnegie Steel headquarters plant is. He's actually not in the country. He's in Scotland at the time, and the guy that's managing the plant and operations there, a guy by the name of Frick, is going to hire non-union workers when they go on strike. They bring in the Pinkertons, actually, which were the guards and the protection for Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, but they're kind of like a secret service in a sense, not for the U.S. government, but a hired service of investigators and armed protection for whoever can pay the most, and so they get hired on by Carnegie Steel and the representative Frick here. There's violence to the extent that there is literally the state militia coming in, and there are military arms used, and it is in some serious violent bloodshed, as you've seen already. The strike fails. The plant reopens without those union workers, and it has a very negative effect on Carnegie. He soon sells his company a little while later. He doesn't want to be seen as a bad man, although he doesn't necessarily work very well with supporting his workers in terms of pay, as you have seen. Another major strike, 1894. Notice the dates here. We're right in and around the 1893, Panic of 1893. The Pullman Railroad Car Company strike happens in Chicago. And here the workers are striking for wages, which is pretty normal. They were cut about 25%. Eugene V. Debs led the strike in the American Railway Union in that particular strike. And the Pullman Railroad Car basically works to make railroad cars that were for passengers, with the plush seats and the bedding and the restaurant, the food services and things like that. And it's on such a large scale that railroad traffic is disrupted and stopped again. They were told to stop the strike by the state and courts, but they didn't. And the American Railway Union and Eugene V. Debs members were put in jail because of that particular situation. The United States Attorney General steps in, right? The response of government is bringing the militia, state level and the federal level. He issues a court order or an injunction, important term, to basically end the strike. You're holding up the mail and trade. And again, he refuses, and he gets put in jail for a period of time. And so workers are put down with violence. They're put in jail. They're arrested. Federal troops are sent in. State militia members are sent in to shut down these strikes. Disruptive to the economy, threatening to the system and the powers that be. It looks radical, and when the strikes get violent, they look like they're perhaps a communist revolution, right? An anarchist revolution. Now, the two aren't necessarily the same at all. The anarchists not believing in any real form of government. All government largely is bad. The communists will use strong armed government to take over the means of production and keep things equal. Talk about that a little bit more. But that is the lesson here for today. So your reflection is get after your left-hand side, work on the chart, use this set of notes and the video information to complete the chart in terms of what their goals are, who is included, methods and strategies, were their goals achieved, to identify the similarities and difference between all those unions. Good day. Keep making the hay.